Ringside Boxing Show, right?
This is ring announcer Thomas Triber. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the time has arrived for Inside Boxing Weekly. So here are your hosts, Mike Goodpaster, John Einreinhofer, and Jeremiah Preisser on the Grueling Truth Sports Network.
Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Weekly is brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation. If you want to find out more about them, go to Alex Ramos and Jackie Richardson's Retired Boxer Foundation page and click on it. I am your co-host for the Inside Boxing Weekly show, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I want to welcome in my co-host. First up, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
Hey, I'm doing real well. Let's talk some boxing, guys.
All right, and of course, last but certainly not least, especially when we're comparing him to Jeremiah, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
Good to be here, guys.
All right, so we have 4 or 5 fights to talk about this week, and then later on in the show, not too far from now, we'll talk about the nominations for the International Boxing Hall of Fame, who we think should be in, who we think shouldn't. And we're going to start off by talking about the World Boxing Super Series card that comes up, I believe, Sunday. Edward Troyanovsky against Kyrie Relic, which is for the WBA World Super Lightweight title. John, what's your take on this?
The best I can say about this fight is it's pretty close to, just about even money. So it's a competitive fight, and as you guys both know, some of my criticism of the World Boxing Super Series has been that it's a little overrated in the early rounds. In other words, you probably have these tournaments with 8 guys in there when you probably should have about 4, and the early round matchups aren't even competitive. Now, this fight is an exception in that it is competitive. It's just about even money. So that's been an exception for these World Boxing Super Series early round fights. You know, Troyanovsky's already in his late 30s. He's more of a puncher. Relic, had 2 good fights against Bartholomew, who can be up and down, but when he's up, he is a dangerous, tough fighter to fight. So those are pretty good wins. Even at this point, some people have called Relic a dark horse in this. I don't see that, but I think he'll have enough to get by Troyanovsky, probably by a decision. He's fought pretty well, but as far as this tournament goes, I don't think either of these guys are world beaters. Of course, it was sort of almost, you hate to say it, but like a lucky punch. But, Troyanovsky, suffered that first round KO a few years back. And, that always leaves him a little suspect at this point.
All right, Jeremiah.
Yeah, I think it's a quality matchup. I mean, Relic is, both these guys are guys that I've been following for a while. I mean, Relic was, I don't know if he still is, but he was trained by Ricky Hatton. So, initially there was that intrigue there where, he pulled this Eastern European guy kind of out of nowhere and shaped and developed him. And I was happy to see him beat Bartholomew, especially in the rematch. And, I think he's a good grinder type. He works hard. He's got good stamina. His power is pretty good. The body punching is there. It's not world class, but it's there. And you're pairing him with a guy in Edward Troyanovsky, who I've seen just about everything in his career. And, he's not typically the kind of guy that you follow that closely. But I just decided to look at his back catalog just because he is one of the few genuine punchers in the sport. I mean, if the guy hits you, it can be lights out. I mean, some of his shots are just devastating, especially the right hand. And he's a tall guy, so but he's a little bit on the older side. So, that's part of the reason why, not much is expected of him at this point, but it is an intriguing fight because Relic, he's kind of a tall guy himself, so it seems as if he would be able to grind Troyanovsky down and maybe stop him late or earn a decision. Like John said, there's still some issues trying to gauge whether or not Troyanovsky is actually tough enough to take a sustained punishment, because it could, maybe he was just caught with the right shot against Indongo. But there's always going to be that moment there. That's what I find so intriguing about this fight, is that Relic is easy enough to hit, where there's going to be moments and possibly some shaky moments in the fight. I mean, again, Troyanovsky is a genuine puncher. To me, he's the hardest puncher that we've seen at 140 pounds since Randall Bailey. So that's the intrigue there. I do think John is kind of right in that it's a little thin down here, and these guys aren't expected to overcome potential fights in Josh Taylor or Prograis, whoever they happen to meet. But it's a good fight, and I like it. So I'm gonna choose Relic by decision here.
All right, I agree. I like Relic also. Next up, we got Juan Carlos Payano against Inoue, and everybody wants to watch Inoue fight, Jeremiah. Will he have his hands full here, or should this be an easy victory?
I wouldn't say that it's an easy victory. Payano is another one of those guys who, isn't talked about much. I mean, anything under 126, you're not going to hear a lot of hype for. But Payano fought Rasheed Warren, a guy that we interviewed, and in the first fight, in the second fight, he was competitive in both, especially the first. I mean, this is a guy with strong amateur pedigree. He's a good boxer. He's got quick hands. Because of that amateur background, he understands timing and distance well. He throws punches in combination. He works hard. 12 rounds. So I see potential issues with Inoue there. The problem with Payano is he lacks a big punch. So, if you can't keep a guy like Inoue off you, it's unlikely that you're going to beat him. And that's the way I see this fight playing out. I mean, I think Payano is going to be strong early on. I'm not necessarily saying that he's going to win the fight early or anything, but he's quality. I mean, I think he's a world-class operator in many regards. And Inoue, I think, should learn a thing or two from this fight, because he's fighting a guy craftier than any other, I believe, that he's faced off with at this point in his career. So I think Inoue's probably going to stop him late. He might even have to settle for a decision. It's going to be tough, because I'm still trying to gauge where Inoue exactly is at 118 pounds. It's one of those things, like he's looked good so far, but he's by and large fighting overmatched opposition. So we'll see. But I'm going to pick Inoue by late stoppage.
All right. John, agree or disagree?
But I don't think Payano has anything for Inoue. He's not even as good as Jamie McDonnell, who Inoue blew out in the first round. I just see anything Payano can do here. He doesn't have the pop. Even though in this day and age, when people are ranking 17 divisions, he's had a belt. He's been a top 10 bantamweight, but he's, to me, more of the alphabet variety. He had the fights with Warren, but still, you look at his overall record, you watch him fight, and to me, he's more of the classic former alphabet belt holder, and this is typical to me of what you're getting in these first round World Boxing Super Series fights, which is something that's going to be a mismatch dressed up as a tournament. And I don't think Inoue has any problem at all here, and probably stops Payano early.
All right, I actually agree with John. I think this fight doesn't go more than 3 or 4 rounds at most. But I do think Payano's better than what John just said. So I think I agree with both of you a little bit. I just don't think Inoue's the guy that Payano's going to give any trouble to. Next up, Thomas Adamek against Jarrell Miller. I don't even know where we're talking about this, but it was on the list, so I put it down. But Jarrell Miller may fight. Jarrell Miller is showing what kind of champion he could be someday, because he's calling out Frezekindo, Jeremiah.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited about all that. I mean, I think that's I think that that's the best way that he could take his career right now. I mean, Frezo Kendo is obviously near the top of the pecking order. He's dangerous. I mean, come on, Thomas Adamek and then Frezo Kendo. Give me a break here. I mean, I understand the hesitancy in traveling to Bulgaria and fighting Kubrat Pulev on his home turf. I get it. I really do. But it reminds me of how risk averse so many of these modern fighters are. It's like, we've come to the point where so many guys want home field advantage, and some of these guys aren't willing to travel, and that's what I really like about Alexander Usyk, and I'm glad to see people give him a lot of credit for, is that he'll take you on your own soil and beat you down. And Miller refusing to go to Bulgaria again, I do understand the hesitancy. I do. But sometimes you got to man up and take the challenge, and then a lot of times once you get over that hump, you can demand larger paydays. I mean, beating Tomas Adamek and potentially Frezo Kendo, it really wouldn't be surprise me if he was put in line for that, that BS regular belt that some alphabet organization is trying to pawn off on these fighters. But no, that's not the sort of challenges that you want to see a guy who's an upstart like Jarrell Miller take. It's like a completely washed Thomas Adamek and Frezo Kendo. It's just not doing it for me. Yeah, I mean, he's going to beat
Adamek 6 years ago. This would have been a good fight. Unfortunately, it's not 6 years ago. And in the meantime, Adamek has been, he got stopped by Eric Molina, and he lost the unanimous decision to Arthur Spilka. So that'll tell you what he is. But my question
it's going to be a beatdown.
My question is this, though, John. Does this make you more excited for Thomas Adamek? Because if Thomas Adamek wins, we could have Thomas Adamek against Frezo Kendo for the heavyweight championship.
No, I think this is sad, because I think that Thomas Adamek has actually had an underrated career. I mean, remember the guy?
Fighter.
Yeah, the guy is a real tough
good
fighter. Started out at light heavyweight, had a belt there, had some real exciting fights there with the Australian, and moved up, fought at cruiserweight. Picked up a belt, had good fights with Steve Cunningham, beat Areola, became a legit top 10 heavyweight, took on Vitaly Klitschko, beat Galata, even though it was a Galata past his best, beat Grant past his best, but still this guy, coming up from light heavyweight, he shows even in the modern era that you can do it. I think it's something that people should keep in mind. But with that said, because I had a lot of respect for Adamek, I mean, yeah, as Mike pointed out, getting stopped by Molina, losing to Spielka, we usually don't go this far when we're talking about fights, but I'll say on this one, this fight shouldn't be allowed. This fight shouldn't be happening. If
Jarrell Miller falls on Thomas Adamek, he could kill him.
Well, just with the volume of punches that Miller throws, it's going to be ugly, and I think it's going to be ugly quick. I don't think this one will go very long, and it shouldn't. But Eddie Hearn's not doing a good job with Jarrell Miller. Miller is a guy who really is an interesting fighter, and he's interesting outside of the ring. He's from Brooklyn. I mean, this is a guy that if American boxing would be getting marketed, better, and or Miller was with somebody who would give him more exposure. I mean, he's a guy that's got big potential for popularity relatively to what boxing is today, popularity wise. And he's fighting. I didn't like on HBO. He's fighting to hop on now. On what's on Miller's. He's taking it too far, coming in over 300 pounds, and he didn't perform as well as he should have. That's on him. But, now to have Adamek and be talking about Frezo Kendo, here's a guy that I still think could be a dangerous opponent for just about any heavyweight if he's in proper condition because of the package he brings. And he's turning himself into a sideshow fighting guys like Adamek and talking about a Kendo. And Eddie Hearn, seems to have his certain system of what he wants to do with certain guys, and I think this is part of it. He's got the DAZN thing, and this is on the DAZN, but so nobody in the U.S. is going to see it, and it's going to be against Thomas Adamek, and it's going to be a joke because Adamek shouldn't be fighting, and I just don't think it's. I don't think it's good for Miller. I mean, if Hearn's got Miller and he's got people like Dillian White, forget about the nonsense about Dillian White challenging Wilder. Put Miller in the ring with Dillian White, or put Miller in the ring with Chisora or something like that, and stop this kind of nonsense. Don't be afraid to.
I would love to see Dillian White fight Deontay Wilder, because then outside of Ortiz, Wilder would fight somebody that would have a chance.
No, he's fighting Fury, Mike, and Fury's got a lot better chance than Dillian White does.
I don't think he does. I don't think a cracked out
the odds makers strongly
fuck
disagree
the odds makers. I'm so sick of hearing that shit. Because you know what? Right now, Joshua Wilder is a plus 255. And I mean, if you bet Wilder, you get plus 255. I mean, so the odds makers have taken us from plus 175 a few months ago to plus 255 now, and as you say, those are the guys that are in the know.
What's that got to do with Wilder fighting Fury and having a better chance?
I don't see what.
Fury having a much better chance than Dillian White does.
Yeah, I know, because Fury's looked much better than Dillian White. Dillian White just beat Joseph Parker. All right, we watched. I mean,
yeah, and he was about unconscious. And he was about unconscious. He was about unconscious when the final bell rang.
He was about unconscious. He won the fight against a legit top 10 heavyweight. Tyson Fury has not fought a legit top 10 heavyweight in 3 years? And in the meantime, he's been on cocaine. He's been on, a little bit of everything. He's been busted twice for drug tests, which God knows if it was Canelo Alvarez, it would be all right with you. So when I look at this, we've got a guy in Tyson Fury that doesn't deserve a title shot.
Mike, I just analyzed the drug test properly. Just because you're not analyzing them correctly
I'm not analyzing them correctly, because with my history, I have no idea like you do. I just know this. I know that, a hair follicle test 30 days later doesn't prove shit. And I also know this. When boxing people that I respect tell me that everybody knows this is going on, Kermit Centron was on our show 3 years ago talking about how Canelo Alvarez was juicing and everybody knew it. But the fact is this. Tyson Fury fought Francesco Pianetta and had trouble. I mean, it was basically they stood there and stared at each other. This fight is a fucking joke between Wilder and Fury. If you watch these guys with this comical bullshit that they do in these pre-fight press conferences, we're going to get two guys that stand there and stare at each other. That's all we're going to get, because that's all they are. Deontay Wilder has been protected for a reason. And to say that Dillian White has not done as much as Tyson Fury in the last 3 years is ludicrous. I mean, Tyson Fury getting a title shot is ludicrous. He shouldn't be ranked in the top 10. He's been out for 3 years. He fought Sefer Seferi, who Jeremiah could beat easily. And it goes 4 or 5 rounds. Seferi quits. Tyson Fury's carrying around like a little baby before the fight. It's a fucking joke. Tyson Fury is a joke. All right? So don't give me that.
Fury's the last guy to win. Fury's the last guy to win the linear title in the ring.
Oh, fuck. Whatever. What's he done the last 3 years?
He's been back. He's back. He's fought 2 fights. He's back.
Against guys that you trashed. And he was not impressive.
The odds makers have the fight close to even money. Mike, if you feel that way, you should go down to Vegas and put $10,000 on Deontay Wilder.
Oh, I would,
because
without a problem. Because this is you know what? The reason I wouldn't is because this fight's bought and paid for. It's just the way it is. Tyson Fury has nothing
bought
left.
And paid for? Explain to me how it's bought and paid for.
I know, because you got to have proof, because there's never been a fixed fight in boxing. There's never been a fight where guys took it easy. Do we really believe Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather fought a legit fight? I mean, come on. Pacquiao acts like he was hurt. They played it safe. It happens all the time in boxing. Right now, nobody gives a shit about Deontay Wilder.
Explain to me how Fury and Wilder is bought and paid for.
It's a safe fight. They're going to take it easy. They're going to get through the fight. They can make a little bit of money. They can screw the public over. If it's a legit fight, it'll be over quickly. Because Tyson Fury has nothing. Tell me a time Tyson Fury looked impressive to you, because you're the one that always trashed Tyson Fury. 6 months ago you were telling what a joke it was, and that he ought to just cash out and take a Deontay Wilder fight. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's cashing out, just like you said. But now, since he's fighting your boy Deontay Wilder, all of a sudden this is legitimate. I mean, 3 years ago he fought what you called the worst fight you've ever seen for a heavyweight championship. I mean, he didn't win the fight. He just threw a couple more punches than Vladimir Klitschko. So when this is over with, I mean, I don't want to hear anything either way, because Tyson Fury has given us no reason to think he can even fight. I mean, if you look at his career and his record, what are his great wins? I mean, Derek Chisora? I mean, he had trouble in his 12th fight with, I forget who it was, but was it?
Right now, Derek Chisora is in Transnational's top 10.
Yeah, but does anybody think he's any good? I mean, he can land a punch. He's an exciting fighter. He's pretty much like Deontay Wilder. If he lands a punch, he can beat you. I mean, I'm sorry, but I watch this, and I get sick of hearing this shit about Deontay Wilder, and you hear it all the time now, because, he talks a lot of shit. Big deal. And the problem is this: when he fights Tyson Fury and they get up there and they talk to each other, I mean, Deontay Wilder's pretty much a moron. And I think that translates to the way he fights, because there's nothing technically sound about him. Every once in a while, he'll throw a jab. Nobody brings up the fact that when he fought Luis Ortiz, the first 4 rounds, he kept his ass at a safe distance, and in the 3rd or 4th round, actually turned and ran back into the corner to get away from him. Luis Ortiz is in his 40s.
He knocked out Luis Ortiz.
That's awesome. He knocked out Luis Ortiz.
Hold on. You predicted that Ortiz would knock out Wilder.
You know what? I don't even want to hear that shit, because all I'm going to say is this.
I know you don't.
Because you don't want to hear that you predicted Shabransky to stop Sergey Kovalev. What's the dumber pick?
Well, Mike, you said that there was.
My pick was right.
Well, wait, we're talking about Wilder. We're talking about Wilder and Ortiz.
Yeah,
we're talking about Wilder and Ortiz.
Nobody brings up the 30 seconds, 20 to 30 seconds that he got extra for no fucking reason. No reason at all. Nobody brings it up.
You were correct. Ortiz beat him.
Yeah. If there wasn't some shit going on in the background, the fight was over. The fight was over.
The result was Wilder by KO.
Can you answer the question of why he got an extra 30 seconds when he got hurt? They acted like they were wiping up a wet spot that wasn't there. Am I imagining this, Jeremiah, or am I full of shit here? Did that not happen? Nobody brings it up.
Well,
for good reason, because Wilder knocked him out.
With good reason. Yeah, that's the dumbest fucking thing anybody could ever say. Because with reason, he knocked him out. Yeah, with help. Because when he was about to get knocked out, they stopped. They gave him an extra 30 seconds. When Ortiz got in trouble, they stopped the fight. Why didn't they give Ortiz an extra 30 seconds when he got buzzed?
So Wilder won by conspiracy?
Well, okay, you're right. Because in boxing, that never happens. I would say that probably 50% of the fights we've ever seen, there was some bullshit involved. That's why the house fighter wins. That's why Canelo Alvarez, in 2 close fights that everybody says could have went either way, on 1 card out of 6, somebody saw Golovkin win. So
that was a conspiracy. So that was a conspiracy too. So Moretti
there's no
scored
doubt.
the first fight
There's
for
no
Golovkin.
I don't give a fuck.
And then he scored the second fight for Canelo, but it was a conspiracy.
Well, you know what? If I'm setting up a fixed fight, yeah, that's how I would do it. I would bring the same judge in, have him score it the opposite way, and then people could sit there and say, well, it can't be because he did this. Dave Moretti has always been a crook. You look at the way he scored fights in the past, back to Vegas in the 80s. All those guys in Vegas were bought and paid for. The house fighter always wins, John. There's very few cases where the house fighter doesn't win.
So was he a crook in the first fight when he scored it for Golovkin?
What I'm saying is this, yes. They might have told him to score it like that. We need a split decision. Do you really think in the history of boxing that you've read that that's impossible?
So when Steve Weisfeld
No, I asked you a question.
Golovkin,
impossible?
When Steve Weisfeld
Just ignore the question. Fuck Steve Weisfeld.
Golovkin,
I don't care about Steve Weisfeld. He's a crook too. All these guys are bought and paid for.
Okay, so was he a crook when he scored the Golovkin-Jacobs fight for Golovkin?
Was he a crook? I don't know. He might have been, because that fight to me could have went either way. And you know what? I hate to tell you this, but Golovkin wins that fight. Hold on. Who's the house fighter there? Jacobs and Canelo don't make no money. Triple G and Canelo makes money. It was just like Felix Sturm and Oscar De La Hoya. Felix Sturm whipped his ass, but they needed De La Hoya Hopkins, not Sturm Hopkins. So, yeah, Felix Sturm got fucked. That's just the way it is. It's the way boxing works. You know, that's the problem with boxing. But people will still watch people fight. I mean, it's just the way it's always been. You had Hagler-Leonard scored 118 to 108 by, Guy Jutras. That was not a 118-108 fight. But you know what? In the long run, it makes more sense if Leonard wins, because Leonard was going to keep fighting, and Hagler already made it known he was done. I don't think there's a coincidence here when every close fight, probably 90% of close fights ever fought, go to the guy that has the promoter. I mean, if you look at it, I guarantee you this. I know it happened before the first fight. You know, the presidents of the organizations sit with Oscar De La Hoya. The officials did. The referee did. They had dinner the night before. This happens all the time in boxing. You know, if it happened before the Super Bowl last year and the referees were sitting with Doug Peterson and the Eagles, they wouldn't even be allowed to play the game the next day. But this is a sport where it's accepted. Everybody knows it happens. Everybody turns the other cheek, and everybody lets it go. The only thing more corrupt in boxing is the NCAA. But at least the NCAA, you usually get a real result. We don't get a real result here most of the time. Jeremiah, would you like to add anything since we've ignored you for 15 minutes?
Well, I mean, there would be a lot to tackle there. I mean, do I think corruption exists? Obviously, I do. I mean, I've written articles on it. You know, I addressed this on Quora and, you know, went in depth there. I mean, of course, I believe it exists. I mean, the problem is trying to, you know, obviously I would agree in the sense that I do think there's a correlation between, you know, the house fighter getting decisions. Right. I mean, there's a correlation there where, you know, oddly because I mean, I was talking about Rocky Lockridge at length earlier where, you know, he fights a Puerto Rican in Puerto Rico. Well, somehow Wilfredo Gomez gets that decision, even though the overwhelming majority of people I know who saw the fight had Lockridge winning that fight. Right. He fights, you know, Eusebio Pedrosa for a WBA trinket. The WBA is stationed in Panama. So, okay, you're fighting a Panamanian for, you know, a Panamanian who holds a Panamanian title, and he loses in a fight that's, you know, you look at the commentators and they have it about 10-5 in Lockridge's favor. You look at, you know, he fights Julio Cesar Chavez. Yeah, he fights Chavez for the WBC trinket. The WBC is you know, just about a Mexican institution, and he loses. I mean, none of this can be coincidental. I mean, I'm all for acknowledging that there are times when incompetence just plays a role. You know, that's, you know, because we've talked about this before where, you know, you can be viewing at a different angle and see a different fight than somebody else. You know, again, so you've got to acknowledge that there is some of that. But, of course, you can't have this go on and on and on and on for, you know, 100+ years and not make that connection that there's you know, that it's happening. Again, like you said, you can't, you know, Teddy Atlas was talking about it too, is you couldn't have before the World Series, you know, the Steinbrenners, you know, taking all the umpires and whatnot to dinner and, you know, then have them play the game. It just doesn't make any sense, but it does happen in boxing. It happens all the time. I mean, we all know, you know, you look at the WBC convention in the Ukraine, and you look at the list of fights that they've, you know, quote unquote ordered, you know, like Leo Santa Cruz and Gary Russell Jr. That's not because that's necessarily what the WBC wants. It's because what Al Heyman wants of the WBC, right? I mean, it's a web of political association and elbow rubbing and whatnot that, you know, by and large dictates the direction of boxing. And it's unfortunate. And until we get a national commission, it's never going to be cleaned up. But yeah, Jarrell Miller is going to beat up Thomas Adamek.
Yeah, fuck it. That's going to be easy anyways. Next up, we got Thomas Delorme versus Jesse Vargas, John. And the thing that is shocking here is this doesn't say that it's for a championship of any kind.
Yeah, it's not really that exciting of a matchup, except that Vargas surprisingly was in a good fight recently with Adrian Broner that provided some action, and Delorme last year had a surprisingly good fight with your Dennis Ugas. So even though neither of them are punchers, they've both been in a surprisingly good fight recently. But unfortunately, that would seem to be the exception more than the rule. I can't see where you put these two guys together and you're going to expect a particularly action fight. Not really a good styles matchup. Delorme's hot and cold. When he seems to show up more motivated, he does have some ability that he can make something happen. And, Vargas to some degree can be like that as well. That's the part that makes it a little bit difficult to call. The odds on the fight are, relatively close, but you've got Vargas as a solid favorite. I would think that he'll probably take a decision in this fight. But, for DAZN, not a big action card that they've got here.
Yeah, but I don't have to pay $15, and they don't show me no fights for like 3 months. Next up is Jeremiah. What's your take on this fight?
Next up, I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a pretty. I think it's going to be a pretty good boxing match. I mean, I don't expect a slugfest, of course, but because Jesse Vargas is not really a big hitter, and Thomas Delorme can box well when he needs to. I think it's going to be an interesting thinking man's match, at least for a little while. I see this going the distance. I think Jesse Vargas will probably eke it out, and then he'll probably get a big payday afterwards. But yeah, I actually think that it's going to be a good competitive fight. Vargas just doesn't really. Vargas is one of those guys I've been watching for a while too, and not because I had a particular interest in him, just because he has been getting a lot of hype for a long time. And you watch some of his old fights, and he's had too many close decisions with too many guys that aren't that good. I mean, talking about fringe level guys. So I've never really been convinced of Vargas. The one punch that he landed on Timothy Bradley is still kind of the highlight of his career. And if he's still working with Mike McCallum and he's choosing to box, smartly like he did in his last fight, I'm not exactly sure that's going to be a good approach against a guy like Thomas Delorme, again, who can box pretty well. I mean, his chin is a little bit suspect, and he showed a little heart in some of his fights, but I'm not sure that's the right approach for Jesse Vargas. But I do think he'll eke out a decision here.
All right, next up for the IBF light heavyweight championship of the world, Arthur Beterbiev against Calum Johnson. Calum Johnson's a guy that's never fought anywhere near Beterbiev. I mean, his last fight was against Frank Buglioni, who is a journeyman in Great Britain, and he stopped him in the first round. Am I wrong here, Jeremiah? Have you seen more in Calum Johnson than I have, or is this? I mean, this is a mismatch to me, and I've never really been impressed with Beterbiev, but I think he's going to take this fight relatively easy.
Yeah, I feel as if Johnson is he's a European level guy, but the upset against Buglioni was pretty startling in the sense that most people were picking against Calum, and so the fact that he went out there and stopped him in the first round was pretty impressive. Stylistically, you think that this would play into Artur Beterbiev's hands. Johnson is more of a come forward guy. He doesn't have the the well schooled technique of a guy like Beterbiev. He doesn't have the one punch power. But I will find it interesting. I'm wondering what Calum's approach is going to be to this, because I always wonder with a guy like Beterbiev, again, who looked pedestrian against Koling, I wonder how he would react if a guy just came right at him. And I'm wondering if Calum Johnson will do that. That's the only angle I see where it might get interesting. But if Calum chooses to box, use the center ring, I think he's going to get knocked out pretty early. But I think there is an angle where it could be interesting. But Beterbiev's got to step it up after this. I mean, Koling and then Johnson, you got to get away from the European level guys and move up and on to better things, especially when Bivol and Gvozdyk are stepping it up. So I think he's going to stop him, early and mid rounds. might be an interesting fight in spots, but I doubt it.
All right, John.
I think this is a mismatch. I think that Hearn's just, selling this as a Brit fighting for an alphabet belt. And I think it's a mismatch. The only intrigue for me about the fight is, boxing does not have a good record of punchers who hurt their shoulders coming back from the injury. And Beterbiev might be slipping into that category for me. He looked great before he hurt his shoulder. He hasn't looked good since. They said Jerry Cooney had a bad shoulder injury even after the Norton fight. Jarrett Hurd's had one recently. He's going to be coming back. When you see it with a puncher, the rotator cuff injury, they just don't seem to come back the same. And I think that's what we probably are seeing with Beterbiev, because there was no doubt before that his power was there, and he had the shoulder injury laid off. He hasn't really looked that good since. I'm kind of just looking at this and thinking if Beterbiev can be anything like he was before he hurt the shoulder, he should get Callum Johnson out of there quickly, very quickly. And if he has to go 12, like Jeremiah alluded to the Colling fight, he really looked poor there. And a lot of these guys, sometimes these guys are fighting down to their competition a little bit too. It's not an excuse, but some of them do it. And, that could be a bit of a possibility with Beterbiev. He really hasn't been in against somebody that would provide any kind of motivation despite the alphabet belt in recent years. So, time for him to at least get an impressive stoppage. He should be able to do it here, unless that shoulder injury has just got him too far gone as a puncher, and we're not going to see the same puncher we saw before that. So I'm just looking for that. But in terms of the abilities of the two guys, this is a mismatch to me.
All right, guys. Now we're going to talk about something that came up on social media today. The International Boxing Hall of Fame announced its candidates for the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And you are not required to vote for 5, but you can vote for up to 5 boxers. The list to me was really unimpressive, Jeremiah. What was your take on the list? Because there's nobody here when I read this list that I think Hall of Famer right away.
Yep. Yes, sir. I absolutely agree with you in the sense that I think this is the problem, and I think both of you guys would agree with me, is that when you're looking at the Hall of Fame, and it's odd the context in which people talk about this compared to other sports. In baseball, which I think is generally viewed as having the highest standard, you look at some of these guys, they just seem like they weed, the fringe guys out much better than other sports, where it's like, hey, you're in if you deserve it, you're out if you don't deserve it. And boxing is one of these, like, you look at this list and then you go travel to Twitter, or you go travel on Facebook, and you look at the names that are being thrown out. It's like there's so many fringe guys that people are just, they're throwing out names based on who they liked when they grew up, or it's just a lot of bias that's involved. I mean, I saw a lot of people from Great Britain, the Nigel Benns, the Chris Eubanks, the Ricky Hattons. You saw the guys who have a bias towards the little guys, talk about this so-and-so, or, like I saw James Buddy McGirt get quite a few names up there. I mean, it shows you how weak that the International Boxing Hall of Fame is, that it can be so open for debate. I mean, I don't understand why we don't acknowledge that you should be the best of the best to get your name inside this hall. And the fact that we got so many fringe guys and there's so much debate really highlights how weak it is. And I know people are like, oh, well, Arturo Gatti is in, and, basically the floodgates are open and anybody can get in. And I've talked about this before. And again, I'm not saying Gatti deserves it. I'm not saying he doesn't. But what I think is Gatti is a transcendent figure, and you're always going to have guys like that in the Hall of Fame. Like again, we talked about this before. Who's the guy from the Pittsburgh Pirates who, the second baseman,
Bill
Mazeroski.
Bill Mazeroski.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, you have a guy like him who
he was like a 262 lifetime hitter.
Exactly, but he's one of those guys, because of the significance of what he was able to accomplish.
Joe Namath in the NFL.
Right. Exactly. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having, again, those transcendental figures involved in there. But the problem is Gotti is being judged by a different standard than others, right? It's not called the Hall of Talent. It is called the Hall of Fame. And Arturo Gotti, for what it's worth, he's talked about far more than the vast majority of the guys who are in the Hall of Fame right now. He's talked about far more. I mean, Jesus, you just look at the list of names. And just the ink that's been given to Gotti and the social media posts and whatnot, far more than all 99% of these guys. So again, I'm looking at this list of names, and when I'm looking at some of the guys who I think should be in the Hall of Fame, I think most convincingly you would have Rafael Marquez. I think Rafael Marquez is one of the guys I think who's probably most deserving, not necessarily because talent-wise he was above and beyond others, but because of what he was able to do in his fights with Israel Vasquez. I mean, not only is this a guy who's able to stop Tim Austin, who is a damn good fighter, but I also believe he beat Mark Too Sharp Johnson, even though Too Sharp was a little long in the tooth at the time. But you combine those fights along with the level that he was able to fight at for years, and I think he's up there. Again, I'm not 100% convinced there. I've been going on for years about Rocky Lockridge, who, even though you look at his record, and again, we got to acknowledge that there are some piss poor decisions that happen in boxing, and I think Rocky Lockridge was part of at least two of them. He beat Wilfredo Gomez in Puerto Rico. He beat Pedroza. I mean, in my first writing gig, they asked me to write about Pedroza. So, I started with a clean slate. I didn't really know much about him. I decided to watch his career from front to back. And, I watched him against Lockridge, who I wasn't familiar with at the time. And I'm like, no, Lockridge beat him like 10-5. And you look at go look at Gil Clancy and the other guy commentating. They did a poll in Press Row, and they had it 9-5 going into the last round. And Lockridge, I think, clearly won the last round. You look at his fight against Julio Cesar Chavez, and he arguably won that fight. So we're talking about 3 fights against guys who are in the Hall of Fame, and a lot of guys wouldn't argue against being in the Hall of Fame. I mean, come on. I mean, in my opinion, he got the shaft, right? He's fighting Pedroza at 16-0. He's fighting Gomez in Puerto Rico. He's fighting Chavez Jr. with the deck stacked against him as well. That's a guy who because it's one thing to have single performances where you're fighting great. Like, look at who's the guy who fought, James Toney, and he had, most people, I think even James Toney admitted that he lost to him. But
Dave Tiberi.
Yes, Dave Tiberi. Right. Yeah, so you have those instances where even guys who are just good or fringe contenders can have the best night of their lives and they fight on a level, you never see again. But I think it's another thing to have it consistently where you're fighting 3, guys who are considered all-time greats, at least in divisional categories. And
he's thing, if you watch Rocky Lockridge's career, he also went to the Arco Arena twice to fight Tony Lopez. The first fight, I think, was the fight of the year in 1988. He went to the UK to fight Barry Michael. He went to, I think it was France, to fight Kamel Bou Ali. It was either France or Italy. He was a guy that wasn't afraid to go places to fight. He had a 1-round knockout over Roger Mayweather. He also beat Cornelius Boza Edwards. And I think the thing that people forget is when you look at the Pedroza fight, I mean, the Pedroza fight, I think, was real early in his career. I think it was at the height of what Pedroza was, because really there's not much that he'd fought before. He was part of that. I know John remembers this. Where was it they fought? Totowood, New Jersey. Bobby Ches.
Yeah, he was part of the Tomorrow's Champions guys with Totowa. I saw these guys, a lot of them in Totowa. Yeah, with Ches and Ramos and Johnny Bumpus, and they had Rocky Lockridge, and that's when the Duvas first became major promoters. That's how they worked their way up with those guys.
Yeah, and I think the rematch
with Lockridge was one of the main guys.
Yeah, I think the Pedroza rematch was in Italy also. And I think a lot of Pedrosa's title fights were over there. So yeah, and this is why I get so pissed off about this stuff, because he wasn't a house fighter. If you take just 2 of those 3 fights against Pedrosa, Chavez, and Gomez, and he wins them, he's a Hall of Famer 20 years ago.
Exactly, man, and that's exactly what I was saying with, and not to the point where he's Hall of Fame, but we talked about the Graciano, Racciani, middleweight / light heavyweight who fought, Henry Mask in Germany twice. He fought Darius Michalczewski in Germany twice. And, he's 2 decisions away, one knockout and 1 decision away from being looked at an entirely different light. And it's amazing how quickly fans demote a guy who didn't get the decision to somebody who did get the decision, right? I mean, Rocky Lockridge, he was a black guy fighting Latin fighters either in their hometown or for, Latin belts. It's an unfortunate aspect of the sport. And like you said, man, he's 2 decisions away from being viewed in a much better light, a much brighter light than he is. And we do have to acknowledge that he did have the hiccup against Juan Laporte in a round. Laporte was another very good fighter too.
Another guy where if you just change the Chavez decision, which I think he clearly won the fight, then Juan Laporte goes down completely different.
I know, and it's over and over again.
Lockridge just got caught with a bomb in that fight. I mean, that was,
taking nothing away from
Laporte,
fighter.
but that was right. But that was just that's one of those fights. He just got caught.
Well, and if Lockridge gets the decision and Laporte get the decision, how's that changed the way Chavez is looked at?
Exactly. I mean, but at that point, you knew that the deck was stacked in Chavez's favor. I mean, to the point where a loss in his 12th fight, which was originally a disqualification, was overturned. It was helped to be overturned by a guy who was his manager. I mean, you see that things are not fair. Not all is well in boxing. But I did, I want to ask John, like who are some of the guys? Because honestly, with Lockridge and maybe Rafael Marquez, I'm not really. I mean, I'd like to see a little guy get some credit in a down year like this. Somebody like Sung Kil Moon, I think was pretty rock solid at the top for quite a while. He fought at bantamweight, an original 8 division. Miguel Happy Laura was a guy that I thought was pretty impressive, and I think he was one of the better defenders of all time. The scorecards I don't think reflected accurately, but I thought he beat Daniel Zaragoza pretty convincingly. He beat guys like Davila, who was a contender for a long time. His resume was pretty rock solid. Laciar is a guy I think is pretty borderline, but up there when we're talking about the little guys. Of course, Yuri Arbachikov is a guy that I wrote about and a guy that I like. He was one of those guys, like, after viewing the footage, I actually think his competition and his skill was quite a bit better than people would give on face value. But I'd like to see one of the little guys get it, but then again, it's like none of them are quite good enough for me to say, yeah, they deserve it. They're a lock, except for maybe Rafael Marquez. And again, I think that's partly due to the Vazquez fights.
But the Vazquez, he split 2 and 2. My question to John is, what do you think about Sat Chitolata?
Yeah, well, I don't know about him, but
and I don't even know if that's how you say the name. But I remember reading the Ring magazine and Boxing Illustrated. And the thing I remember about that dude is, like, within a year, and this is something that didn't happen back then. It happens nowadays. But, I mean, he's fighting for the title, a year after he turns pro in, like, his 5th fight. He lost a unanimous decision. But when you look at the people he fought, I mean, Charlie Magri he beat. Gabriel Bernal, I think he had a split decision and a draw with. So his competitions, I mean, actually for the lower weight classes, I think was pretty solid.
Now, for the lower guys, I kind of look at some of the same guys as Jeremiah. I thought, Happy Laura, bantamweight, good fighter. I mean, he had a good run. Rafael Marquez, as Jeremiah pointed out, in the entertaining fights with Vazquez. But I also thought Rafael Marquez had a lot of talent. You kind of didn't think it would finish out with those brawls with Vazquez where, he's just brawling it out. And that took a lot out of both of those guys and kind of ruined both of them once and for all. Well, literally, look at poor, Vazquez ended up having his eye removed. So, as gruesome as that is, but that just happened recently as a result of the damage. So, but he was kind of like his brother. I mean, Juan Manuel, he had talent, and he kind of got the brawling, which was entertaining for the fans. But that's not good for longevity. But him, and I'm with Jeremiah too. Actually, Arbachakov, really one of the first Soviet guys who came over and was good. And he wasn't an original division in flyweight, which I prefer. I feel like you got to have some kind of order.
Especially he had 9 defenses as well.
Exactly. He held that belt for a long time. I don't like to just go on the belt, but still wasn't even as bad as it is now. And he held on for a while. He was kind of the first guy that I thought came over from the Eastern Bloc and established himself. You didn't hear about him much. He was a fighter. So guys, to me, the problem with the Hall of Fame boxing is criteria, and I think except for baseball, the other sports are like that too. So I'm not just picking on boxing there. I think, frankly, you get that in basketball and football. So I don't even know what it's hard to discuss because I don't even know what the criteria is supposed to be. I end up then just sort of thinking of more. All I can do is how I would do it, and I'd have some. I think you'd have to have some varying factors. For me, I like to look at guys that would have been the man or the lineal champ in an original division. I like to look at guys who, if they're only 8 or 9 divisions, would they have been the man or the lineal guy in 2 of the original divisions? I find that usually brings a lot of the cream to the top. I think then in modern boxing, where it gets hard to sort out, if you're trying not to leave people out, then you're going to do, I think, just who did you beat? I hate to have it just come only down to that because I'd like real championships in boxing to still mean something. I hate, even though we're on the cusp of it, I hate to get to the point where boxing has no meaningful championships. And I don't mean that the alphabet. I'm looking at more things like linear and transnational in the ring. So I would probably look at those types of factors. And one factor I'd look at that might be a bit underrated in all halls of fame, but I think you can use it because it generally shows talent. If you start looking at it, it doesn't mean the guy's a physical marvel like people say. It usually just means they were that good, is longevity. In other words, I don't think it would be my only criteria, but if somebody hangs around effectively for a long time, it probably means they were that good, and it probably should be taken into consideration. So for me, I like Donald Curry with being the man in the welterweight division, having the big unification win against McCrory. For me, compared to all this alphabet stuff, that would be enough. Even though he's got a lot of flaws, coming up from light heavyweight, becoming the lineal heavyweight champ, to me, that means something for more. Here, but you're supposed to, vote for no more than 5. So I'm not even saying what 5 I'd look at. I think, Michael Chesky really being that dominant at light heavyweight and arguably being technically the guy and having a long run probably gets underrated. He probably deserves more consideration than I think he gets, or you hear people talk. For me, out of that list, a couple of little guys we talked about, that would be all that would really jump out for me.
Yeah, okay, so real quick, John's.
Okay, I was just going to go with the Donald Curry because I don't see how Donald Curry had a Hall of Fame career. He did have a couple good wins over Marlon Starling. He beat Colin Jones, and of course he beat the immortal Pablo Baez, which you have to give him much respect for.
True.
But when you look at it, to say the win where he wins the lineal title against Milt McCrory should get him in, does that mean James Buster Douglas should be in?
Well, here's what I would say. You're always going to be here or there who maybe gets a lineal title and you didn't look at his overall career as good. But I would still make the argument that if we were down to only lineal titles and guys in 8 or 9 divisions happening to win it, that achievement would be better than a lot of these other guys' careers picking up alphabet.
But see, that's the problem, I think. We're comparing, guys here to guys there, and it shouldn't be. I think when you look at this, when the list comes out for guys that should be in the Hall of Fame, if they should be Hall of Famers, you should go through and say, okay, he's one, he's one, he's one. I mean, it shouldn't have to be a debate for the Hall of Fame. I mean, a Hall of Famer is a Hall of Famer.
You still have to have a criteria, but to me, Mike, if you're going to go on your criteria,
that's my criteria.
Yeah, but that's not a criteria. It's not a criteria, though. That's the problem. It's not a criteria.
Well, I mean, it is a criteria to me, because if you see a guy that's an all-time great fighter, you know it. You know Harry Grebb's a Hall of Famer. You know that
some people might say, I know so-and-so's a Hall of Famer, and then somebody else says, no, I don't know that.
But see, this is the thing. There's not too many guys that are all-time greats that people are going to disagree with. I mean, when you look at Donald Curry, the best fighter he fought knocked him out with one shot in the 5th round. That's Mike McCollum. Lloyd Hunnigan beats him. And see, I compare it. Milt McCrory was his Mike Tyson. He knocks him out in the 2nd round. And then, a few months later, Lloyd Hunnigan comes out of nowhere and just beats the hell out of him. And after that, I mean, you got a DQ win against Carlos Santos. He beats Lupe Aquino by decision. Gianfranco Rossi, who by the grace of God is on this list, because I don't know why in the hell Gianfranco Rossi would even be on this list. And then you got some wins against Brett Lally and them. And I think if you wanted to go criteria, I think it's who you beat and how long you achieved that. And, I mean, you said how long he achieved it had something to do with that. And Milt McCrory, I mean, was a great fighter for about 2 years, maybe 3.
Well, I mean, and longevity, that would not be Curry's strong point. But for my other criteria, for me, he would probably get in. I think what you might be looking at that I might define if I was going to look at your type of criteria, which I think you could do as well if you wanted to really make it exclusive, would be something like this. If we had 8 or 9 divisions, would the guy be a contender for, say, the top, at least arguably, the top 10 to ever have fought in the division, or the top 15 or something like that? That would be a very strict criteria.
Top 20, because most divisions you go top 20, everybody there is pretty damn good. I mean,
yeah,
but really,
you could have that as a very strict criteria.
To me, Mike Tyson's not a Hall of Famer, but I think when you throw in the Arturo Gatti thing, Mike Tyson's a Hall of Famer, if that makes sense, because he helped pull boxing out of kind of an abyss in the mid-'80s, at least with the heavyweight division. And whether you like him or not, or whether you think he was a great fighter or not, he was good for boxing, and he made a tremendous impact on boxing from 1985 on, especially 1985 to 1990. So even though I'm not a big Mike Tyson fan, I wouldn't have him in my top 20 heavyweights. But when it comes down to it, I'd put him in the Hall of Fame because what he did for boxing for those 5 or 6 years where he didn't act like a complete moron, I think were huge for boxing.
Yeah, the Hall of Fame, like Jeremiah said with the Gotti, they've made that part of the criteria. I don't know what they've, to me, they just don't have defined criteria. It's more of like this Hall of Fame to me is just like, and I don't actually dispute this. Like it sort of to me has always been since they started it, like, well, boxing should have the Hall of Fame and there's no real criteria as to who's going to be in it in boxing.
Yep,
and that's why
there's no criteria for football. There's no criteria for baseball.
I agree. I think, has always to have a criteria.
Well, the one Hall of Fame that I know of that has criteria is golf, the PGA. And you have to have won so many tournaments. But you can have a guy that won 120 tournaments but never won a major make the Hall of Fame. You could have another guy that won 10 tournaments and 8 of them could be majors and they wouldn't qualify. You guys weren't expecting me to drop some golf knowledge, were you?
Well, no, if there's something that, where you can have more objective criteria. But, as funny as it sounds, I don't necessarily I've never really faulted boxing for doing what they did. I kind of understood it when people talked about Stallone getting in there or Arturo Gatti. I didn't mind, but here, like when Jeremiah brings this up and puts the ballot up on social media, which is always good to have the discussion. But I just find for this boxing Hall of Fame, I just feel like the debates are for the season, that there's just no real criteria. It's just sort of for the game.
Yeah, there's too much ambiguity.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, well, I think is, I do think the voters, by and large, vote the same way, where they say, hey, who's the best of the best, and they vote that way. I do think that.
Well, I think they take who's the best out of the 16 guys on the list is what they do.
Yeah, they do. Well, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know all the voters, so I'm unsure. Part of it does seem like a popularity contest. I mean, you are getting some guys in who, probably don't deserve it. But I think, maybe the Hall of Fame wants that ambiguity because, maybe they do get the more popular guys in. Because here's the thing is, the international, boxing is a fringe sport. The International Boxing Hall of Fame, it, compared to other Hall of Fames, it's not as glitzy, it's not as glamorous. So I think, maybe the guy who runs the International Boxing Hall of Fame wants the popular guys to get in because that generates traffic. I mean, if you get Sat Chalada in, or you get, Miguel Laura, or Sung Kil Moon. I mean, how many people are you really going to have turn out in favor of those guys? And I think it's unfortunate because in a way it excludes, the good guys, the small guys who really deserve it. And that's a bit unfortunate. I think you see that with the old timers because, we won't go in depth about the old timers. But one thing I noticed is Peter Kane, who is the only guy I saw on the old timers list who is arguably a top 10 guy in his division all time, got overlooked for, I think it was Eddie Booker last year. And Eddie Booker is what, like a top 40, top 30, middleweight all time. I mean, we got to put things into perspective here. But I want to ask John real quick, just for some clarification. Of the small guys that are on the list, give me like 2 or 3 names who you would put on top. And I would just say Sat Chalada real quick is not one of the guys that I would put on there because
I just wanted to say Sat Chalada because when I used to read that when I was supposed to be doing science, in my mind they always introduced him as Sat Chalada. But go ahead.
I just wanted to know
sub featherweight. I would say Arbachakov, Laura, and Rafael Marquez. And I just didn't want to throw in there, too, that I think Jeremiah made a good point about that's why they're having the Hall of Fame. With boxing being sort of an out of the mainstream sport, for them to even have a Hall of Fame, they have to be careful about how it's going to be supported and maintain relevance in terms of popularity. I just throw in there, too. I did like the career of Buddy McGirt as well. I'm not going to say, again, I don't know what the criteria is here, and he's certainly not a top 10 welterweight of all time or anything like that. But guy had a lot of fights. Yeah, exactly. Guy had a lot of fights. He was an old school type fighter in terms of skill and technique, and full guys. And I mean that was a guy that had a good career. I think that was certainly Meldrick Taylor's best win by far, was against Buddy McGirt.
Yeah, I liked McGirt's style too. Definitely old school kind of guy. But to direct it to Mike, just get his opinion on some of the matters. You have seen, because there are so many fringe guys right now. You have seen guys like Hatton. You have seen guys like Ben Eubank who are being thrown around in the mix. What do you make of them? And who would you put? I want to ask you about them, and I also want you to answer. Who would you?
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, of the German light heavyweights, who would you favor, Michalczewski or Mask?
Michalczewski. He beat Virgil Hill, and he beat him at a time when Virgil Hill was the man. And outside of the Tommy Hearns fight in '91, he hadn't lost to anybody. If you're going to go Hatton, Eubank, or Ben, it's Hatton. I mean, I will get. He beat Kostya. That's better than any win Nigel Benn or Chris Eubank ever had. And he was, even though it's not one of the original 8, he was a legit junior welterweight champion at the time. And when I look at a guy like Nigel Benn, I find it kind of funny that people think he could be a Hall of Famer. I mean, he starts his career 22-0, all first and second round knockouts. I think Reggie Miller, the old Indiana Pacer, went 7 rounds with him like halfway through his career. And then the first time he steps up, he fights Michael Watson. And Michael Watchman beat the hell out of him. As a 6-round stoppage, he comes back. He fights 3 or 4 nondescript guys. He beats Doug DeWitt in 1990. He beats Iran Barkley in 1990. Both good fighters, but nothing great. He then loses to Chris Eubank. He beats Robbie Sims in 91. I think Robbie Sims was at his best probably in the mid-'80s, 85 through 87 or 88. You look, his title defenses, though, I mean, he's fighting guys like Kid Milo, whatever the hell that is. Wasn't that the name of the orangutan in Every Which Way But Loose? Lindsey Morgan, Dan Sherry. Thelani Malinga is a solid win. Mauro Galvano. I mean, come on, Nicky Piper, no. And then for some reason, he stopped Mauro Galvano in 4 rounds, and then he gave him a rematch. He beats Lou Gent, who sounds like a really nice guy, but I don't think that's a huge win. He fights Chris Eubank, and it's a draw. He beats Gerald McClellan in 1995. The thing that blows my mind, though, is this. With most Nigel Benn fans, when you bring up Stevie Collins and Thelani Malinga, they all say, well, he was way past his prime there. But they say his best win was against Gerald McClellan. Now, I'll present this. Gerald McClellan was in February of 1995. I mean, Malinga was exactly 1 year later, and then Stevie Collins was twice that year. So he aged really fast. I could tell you that from his greatest win. And Gerald McClellan was a guy that, I mean, he was a good fighter, but there's nothing that I saw Gerald McClellan do that would tell me that Gerald McClellan was a great fighter. So when I look at Nigel Benn, I mean, it's the same thing as Julian Jackson. Julian Jackson knocked a lot of people out. He was a good fighter. Gerald McClellan beat him twice. But if you look at McClellan, outside of the 2 wins against Julian Jackson, and I think Jackson was, I mean, he got stopped in 5 rounds. Jackson was a one-trick ponyo. He was going to knock you out or he was going to get knocked out. So when you look at these guys, I just don't see – and we talked about this earlier today with these guys. Gerald McClellan and Chris Eubank, as much as the English don't want to hear this, were really nothing over here at the time that they were fighting these legendary fights against each other. I don't remember a ton of people saying, oh, these guys have got to fight Roy Jones or James Toney, because it's pretty known fact that Roy Jones and James Toney would have tore their damn heads off. And Roy Jones and James Toney are Hall of Fame fighters. And when you look, and see, this is my thing. To me, when I see Roy Jones, James Toney, those are Hall of Famers. When I see, you know, Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank, I see 2 guys that it's not even a contest if you put them against real Hall of Famers. And that's all I got to say about that.
Well, I would ask, I mean, I'm not a 168-pound expert, but I would ask where they place all time too. I mean, we are talking about a relatively new division, and where exactly do they rate? I mean, they rate below Andre Ward. Joe,
come on.
Joe Calzaghe.
Yes, there's no way they beat any of those guys. Am I wrong here? I think me and John will agree on this. Joe Calzaghe.
Well, here's the thing I just like to say about that to me always dispels it, but it doesn't want to be heard sometimes. Is can you imagine Chris Eubank or Nigel Benn trying to fight heavyweights? I mean, James Toney was in the ring with somebody was standing there with Samuel Feeder.
Hey, the fight with Vasily Yurov at cruiserweight. Could you imagine those guys getting in a fight like that?
It's like you can't. That's what I mean. Roy Jones, beat Ruiz. I mean, you can't even imagine these guys. And frankly, you can't even imagine with Calzaghe. So there's just a difference. I don't care what's said. There's a difference in talent there. That's why that happened with Jones and Toney. It didn't happen with the other guys.
Well,
I'm with you that
if we're looking at middleweight, super middleweights, guys in that area, I know he's just a middleweight, but Sambu Kalambe blows those guys out of the water, and I don't think he's in yet, is he?
No, he's not.
I like Kalambe a lot.
Yeah, he's the first guy to beat Mike McCallum. I mean, that's a lot to say.
Well, okay,
he's a good fighter.
Well, let's go with that. Actually, let's go with the era thing that you brought up. So you look at Hagler on the way out. or post Hagler, right? So take this into account, and let's imagine Nigel Benn or Chris Eubank with any one of these guys. Does he beat Mike McCallum? Does he beat Harold Graham? Do they beat Thomas Hearns? Do they beat Michael Nunn? Do they beat Callum Bay? As you said, let's go to another year. Do they beat Roy Jones Jr.? Do they beat an early Bernard Hopkins? Do they beat Steve Collins was in there. Let's see. One of them lost to Michael Watson, so we'll move on to another year. Let's see what we can get here. Just on a year by year thing, because the middleweight division really started heating up, during that time. But the problem was, of course, that they added all these new divisions, and then you had all these new belts, and that helped muddy the waters a bit. Reggie Johnson. I mean, do either one of them beat Reggie Johnson? I mean, Reggie was a hell of a fighter at his best. I mean, I honestly thought Reggie Johnson beat James Toney, and he was one of the few guys to ever knock him down, and he had him legitimately hurt. He wasn't weebling and wobbling all over the place, but he was legitimately hurt. Let's see, who else do we have? A lot of the same names, but you see where I'm going with this already. I mean, we're talking about, just about 10 guys already, and Eubank and Ben are not on par with these two. James Toney, we already talked about. I mean, that's by and large the summary of the era. So, I mean, we're talking.
McCallum was a better fighter.
Put it like this: McCallum took Michael Watson apart and knocked him out in 11 rounds. The same Michael Watson that stopped in 6 rounds, Nigel Benn. Just thought I'd
McCallum was also able to go up to light heavy. McCallum was also able to go up to light heavy when he was older, and he was able to pick up a belt.
Well, how about this? Mike McCallum in 1985, if you put him against Marvin Hagler, I'm not saying he would beat him because I don't think he would have at that time, but he'd have been in a fight. If you take a 1985 Marvin Hagler against Nigel Benn, it will last about 35 seconds. And it ain't turning out good for Nigel Benn. And Marvin Hagler is a Hall of Famer, as is Mike McCallum. I don't think that those guys – I think when there's that big of a reach – and like I said, I used to read all the boxing magazines, watch every fight I could in the 90s, and I don't remember anybody ever seriously thinking that those two guys could have messed with James Toney or Roy Jones.
No, I mean, the WBO title at the time, which a lot of these Europeans clung on to, and this is what is fucking pissing me off, frankly, about... after your 10-minute rant of expletive laced, Well, I just wanted to get it off my chest because the problem with the WBO is I'm seeing all this revisionist history, and I'm going to write an article on it because I'm about fed up with it. But what you're seeing is now Michael Moore, who is also on the ballot, is getting credit for being. He's starting to be lumped in with like Roy Jones Jr. and James Toney and Bob Fitzsimmons, of guys who won world titles at 175. Michael Spinks, right? Guys who won titles at 175 and were able to win world titles at heavyweight. The WBO was not considered a world title in the early 90s. Nobody took it that serious. At the time, it was viewed as something that the Europeans loved, okay? You had guys like Sven Otke over there milking it. You had guys like Michalczewski over there milking it, though Michalczewski was the lineal champ. I got to acknowledge that. But it was just seen as a title the Europeans loved, and it wasn't considered one of the big boys until Joe Calzaghe came over here and proved that he could actually fight with the best that the Americans had to offer. That was, to me, really the point where people are like, oh, well, maybe not all these European, because even Joe Calzaghe at the time, I remember going to all the forums back in the day, and people saw Calzaghe as a guy who was being protected. He was over there, fighting European level guys and overcoming them. He was milking the defenses a bit like Sven Otke. And then he proved in the Jeff Lacey fight and then the Bernard Hopkins fight that he was really a quality guy. You had Nassim Hamed who had the WBO title for many years, and then he gets his butt whipped by Hamed. It just wasn't one of those things until Calzaghe did it, and until Bob Arum, saw that he could, play them as pawns in his crappy his crappy game. So it wasn't one of those things. You're just getting all this revisionist history now. I've seen 2 articles that say Vladimir Klitschko had a longer reign than Joe Louis because they're now counting his WBO reign, which nobody gave a crap about at the time because Lennox Lewis was the man. His brother Vitaly was fighting for more prestigious belts. It's just nonsense. I'm getting tired of it. Well, and you even have Bad Left Hook going as far as saying that who is a damn southpaw? I can't remember his name. I think he's from Uzbekistan. That guy all of a sudden has more lightweight title defenses than Roberto Duran. It's nonsense.
And this is the thing. Michael Moore's title defenses with the WBO, he won the title against Ramzi Hassan. Then he defended it against Victor Claudio, Frankie Swindell, Freddie Delgado, Leslie Stewart, which Leslie Stewart was a good fighter, but that was a couple years before he fought him. Jeff Thompson, Mike Cedillo, Marcellus Allen, Mario Milo, which I remember that fight. I think it was over like 30 seconds. That was on the undercard of a pay-per-view. And Danny Stonewalker. And Danny Stonewalker was a stud. But and if you look at it...
Swindell was like the only guy that was even near the legitimate top 10 out of all those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best fighter out of those was Leslie Stewart, but he'd seen his better days by then. So,
yeah, he was done by that point.
Yeah, and you look at him. I mean, he won the vacant WBO World Heavyweight title in 1992 against Burt Cooper too.
Right. Yeah, and nobody really gave 2 squirts of piss about it.
He didn't even defend that title because if I remember right, I'm not sure, but I think he got stripped of it because they wanted Tommy Morrison to fight George Foreman for it.
Well, yeah, and when you go later on and you look at Lennox Lewis, I think it was Henry and Conway or however you say his name. Yeah, I think he vacated his WBO trinket to fight Lennox Lewis. I mean, it was one of those things. Lennox Lewis has even acknowledged this, that it didn't matter at the time. And you see these guys like even Showtime. This was disgraceful in my opinion. They said that what was it? Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder. One of them would be. Like the first unified heavyweight champion until Mike Tyson or something because Lennox Lewis didn't win the WBO belt. Lennox Lewis had to put the...
Plus Evander Holyfield won all the belts from Buster Douglas, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Buster Douglas last had it before Mike Tyson even.
Yeah, of course, it was nonsense. But the Showtime even doubled down on what they said, saying they trust their researchers over fucking Lennox Lewis, who straight up told them nobody gave a crap about the WBO belt at the time. It's gotten so absurd, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get more of that crap in the future. But it's just this revisionist history, which is becoming nonsensical, and nobody needs it.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's where it's just the best solution is to just completely ignore the alphabets, go with the ring and transnational and millennial. But it's hard to convince a lot of fans to do that. But that's the way things have got to go.
Because you're not going to convince them because millennials are stupid, John.
Well, and not only that, I think some of these people. No, I was going to say some of these people are invested in it as well. I mean, it's one of those British things, right? Where the WBO it plays favoritism towards European fighters, so they can feel a bit more like they're on the world level, even with some of this IBO nonsense.
Yeah, I think that some of the Brits and the Europeans like the fact that more belts were available. But it's just watering everything down, and
all right, guys.
Got to get away from it.
Me and John are on the East Coast, and we got to get up early in the morning, so we're going to have to wrap this up, John. It's almost 11.
Hey, Mike.
Jeremiah,
so
did you have anything else?
Yeah, Mike. I just wanted to ask: is there anybody on the list who you get to vote for 5, but only 3 go in? If you had to vote for 5, this is to both of you guys, really. So just pick 5 who you would vote for, would not vote for. But just, give me the names.
No, I wouldn't vote for any of them. I don't think any of them are Hall of Famers. John, you're up. I don't. I really don't think.
Not even Lockridge, man?
I don't think Lockridge is an all-time great fighter. Lockridge, if I had to vote, I actually would vote him in because I think he was screwed over by the powers that be because, like I said, he would have beat at least 2 out of 3 guys that were legitimate, immediate Hall of Famers. So, yeah, I'll give you Rocky Lockridge, nobody else.
For the way I tend to look at things with the way they're doing it, I mean, I'd be, like I said, I'd want some more criteria, and I'd like to set the criteria. But where we're at, I mean, I'd probably be looking closely at, Michael Chesky, Curry, Arbachikov. Myself, I'd probably be, again, for me, lineal heavyweight championship, I'd probably be taking a look at more for that. Then for the other guys, it's kind of close, for if I had to pick. I guess that was 4. If I had to pick a 5th, Rafael Marquez was definitely a good, talented fighter. But there's other guys. I mean, Rocky. The arguments you guys make, if you're looking at who actually was better when you start comparing these guys, I mean, Rocky Lockridge had some arguments. I like McGirt's career. It gets kind of hard after that. You only have to.
And real quick, wasn't Lockridge, and I know it's a junior super division that we don't like, but wasn't Lockridge the man at 130 after he starts Roger Mayweather?
I believe he was.
Yeah, I guess he did pick up a belt.
I believe he was.
Yeah.
And I thought he didn't, and I thought he could have gotten better in the decision with the fight with Chavez as well.
I think he won all 3 fights.
Much,
and I actually, if I remember right, I think I had him win in the first Lopez fight, but I think Lopez beat him clearly in the second fight.
Yeah. So real quickly, I guess my names would probably be Rocky Lockridge. I think Rafael Marquez because of the Vasquez fights, and the Tim Austin win, the Too Sharp Johnson. I think that showed that he was more than a puncher. I think Marquez would probably be on my list. Man, this is tough business. I'd probably
all right
Kill
there.
Moon.
If you have to sit there and think
I don't know.
They're not a Hall of Famer.
Well, and my problem with the whole thing though is it. I think you're right in the sense that you should know who a Hall of Famer is. But boxing itself, and I'll just end on this, okay? This will just be my final say. In boxing, because of the way it's set up, with all the political affiliations and all the elbow rubbing and all this nonsense of the added titles and the added divisions, we didn't get to really see how good a lot of these guys truly were. So you take a guy like Yuri Arbachikov, who was the man at 112. He beat 2 lineal champions in his day, 2 linear/lineal champions in his day. He had 9 defenses of that title, but he missed out on fighting the best because 108 and 105 existed. So what did that take out? It took out Ricardo Lopez, and it took out Michael Carbajal and Humberto Gonzalez. If you had Mark Too Sharp Johnson, Gonzalez, Carbajal, and Lopez all fighting at 112 without all the nonsense, you wouldn't just have had Michael Carbajal versus Humberto Gonzalez. You would have had, you would have had a golden era of 112 pounders,
and they might all be Hall of Famers because of it.
Exactly. That's my point. And I looked at Arbachikov, and I really think he was a talented guy. I mean, he was like Kostya stylistically, but he was a better boxer. I mean, the dude was just pinpoint with his accuracy, phenomenal, speed, footwork. I mean, he was just excellent. But he's robbed because there are too many belts. There are too many divisions. You look at Nazarov, who was another guy who came over from Russia, who was part of the Perestroika program, who went to Japan. He was a top contender at 135 while Shane Mosley was around. That fight didn't happen because there was too many trinkets. Michalczewski, because there were too many trinkets. He didn't get to fight Henry. This was a television thing, really, but he didn't fight Henry Mask. He didn't fight Roy Jones Jr. I mean, these are guys who are potential all-time greats, fights, but because of the politics and everything, and a lot of these guys, you can't blame them because they don't know any better. They're just working within the framework that they're given. We're robbed of all these great fights and all these championships and all these fights really telling us how good these guys are, all because of the belts, all because of divisions. And we're bringing it up on this show. People should give us credit, I think, for bringing it up and really putting things into perspective. And that's the way it is, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I saw somebody make the comment the other day on one of Montero's thing. He's like, well, everybody that does a show and everybody that does the boxing has an agenda. And we don't. We don't work for nobody. And, it's basically just me and John fighting and Jeremiah sitting and listening. But
but that's what's good about having no agenda. And Jeremiah doesn't have one either. But that's all these other a lot of them do, but we don't. We can say what we want to. So that's a big plus.
It's all bullshit. So it's just the way of the world. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. We will be back next week with the Inside Boxing Weekly Show. I want to remind everybody, if you go to gruelingtruth.net, you can hear the NFL Weekly Pick'em Show with former Carolina Panther quarterback Tony Pike. It's already on there. You can hear that there. And you can hear all of our shows now on Spotify also, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for John Einreinhofer, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.